the man famously arraigned for declaring the chief business of America is business, went on to proclaim in the very same text that the chief idea of the American people is idealism. Any impartial reading of that famous speech, delivered before the American Society of Newspaper Editors in January 1925, will quickly reveal Coolidge to be anything but an apologist for big business. In its coverage of the address, the next day's issue of the New York Times did not so much as mention the phrase by which succeeding generations of historians have speared Coolidge like a butterfly pinned to a table. For Coolidge, prosperity was an instrument to be used, not a deity to be worshipped. He had said as much a decade earlier in his inaugural address as president of the Massachusetts State Senate. Coolidge, have faith in Massachusetts. Do the day's work. If it be to protect the rights of the weak, whoever objects, do it. If it be to help a powerful corporation better to serve the people, whatever the opposition, do that. Expect to be called a stand-patter, but don't be a stand-patter. Expect to be called a demagogue, but don't be a demagogue. Don't hesitate to be as revolutionary as science. Don't hesitate to be as reactionary as the multiplication table. Statutes, said Coolidge, must appeal to more than material welfare. Wages won't satisfy, be they never so large. Nor houses, nor lands, nor coupons, though they fall thick as the leaves of autumn. Man has a spiritual nature. Touch it, and it must respond as the magnet responds to the pole. That's not the Calvin Coolidge. That's not, I'm tempted to say, your grandfather's Calvin Coolidge. In fact, people have been reassessing Coolidge at least since the 1890s, when his Amherst classmates discovered to their astonishment that this Sphinx-like Vermonter could entertain the campus with his wry delivery of the annual Grove oration. Later, lawmakers in Boston would have second thoughts about the quick-witted president of the state senate, who, when a colleague was told to go to hell by an angry senator, calmly replied that he had looked up the law and found he didn't have to. In the 1920s, the imperious Senator Henry Cabot Lodge would live to regret his contemptuous dismissal of Coolidge's presidential prospects. According to Lodge, the self-proclaimed scholar in politics, no man who lived in a $28 a month Northampton duplex could expect to reside at the much grander address of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Sooner or later, Coolidge proved them all wrong. We don't have time this afternoon to go into all the intricacies and the Byzantine of the Boston police strike of 1919. Suffice it to say, Coolidge went into this career-making episode with a well-earned reputation as a friend of the working man. While still a state senator, he had played a leading role in improving conditions following a textile strike in Lawrence, Massachusetts. He had successfully dealt with post-war work stoppages among Boston telephone workers, the city's subway, and its fire department. His palpable honesty and modest lifestyle attracted supporters in working-class neighborhoods hostile to the likes of Henry Cabot Lodge. In fact, Coolidge's greatest retrospective failing may have been his greatest contemporary asset. Quite simply, his unerring political instincts. Throughout his career, Coolidge displayed a sure grasp of how to let events ripen, flushing out prospective opponents while delegating authority to subordinates. One critic said he displayed a positive genius for inactivity. Until, quite frankly, the situation had ripened to the point where there was political advantage to be had, hay to be made, and that's exactly what he did in the police strike. He really did very little, and until things got out of control, at which point he eventually called in the National Guard. He had reason to believe he wasn't interested in strike breaking, and in fact he had real reason to believe that his actions would be politically unpopular. He was up for re-election that year. And of course, just remember, post-World War I, the country had been swept by strikes. But when the police went on strike, that was that was something beyond the pale. But Coolidge reacted cautiously. He wanted the mayor of Boston and the police commissioner to settle this themselves. He didn't want to intrude, A, because it went against his view of limited government, B, frankly, because it went against what he thought were his political interests. But in any event, he found he had no choice. And he called in the guard and restored order. But that's not what made him famous. That's not what made him president. It was only after it became clear that the striking police officers had lost their gamble that Coolidge moved center stage. Not on his own volition. He was, in fact, unwittingly assisted there by Samuel Gompers, who was the head of the American Federation of Labor. Gompers wired the governor, criticizing his actions against the strikers. Coolidge, in a tersely worded rejoinder, galvanized public opinion by declaring, quote, "There is no right to strike against the public safety by anybody, anywhere, anytime." The words would reverberate 6 decades later when Coolidge's political heir, Ronald Reagan, took the unprecedented step of firing striking air traffic controllers in the summer of 1981. There's a direct connection. Reagan put Coolidge's portrait in the cabinet room and quoted Coolidge at the time of the Patco strike, which was a defining moment in the Reagan presidency. At a time of widespread unrest, fears of domestic Bolshevism, and post-war disillusionment, Coolidge's leadership made him the man of the hour, even if it was largely rhetorical leadership. In that November, far from paying a political price for his actions, he scored the biggest landslide in the history of Massachusetts. By the way, his campaign expenditures for governor that year were $2,171.90. He won 62% of the vote. He even came within 5,000 votes of carrying Boston, which, needless to say, Republicans then and now did not carry. The police strike illustrates Coolidge's uncanny gift of timing. Beyond that, however, it suggests a man reluctant to wade into controversy unless compelled to do so by events otherwise beyond his control or very real sense of duty. That's relevant, it seems to me, when you get to why didn't he take a more proactive role to, quote, avoid Wall Street's collapse in 1929. Coolidge came by his values as the product of rural New England, where democracy and self-reliance were synonymous. Of his Vermont neighbors, he said, they drew no class distinctions except toward those who assumed superior airs. These they held in contempt. He remembered when he came to write his autobiography, as a boy, there was a hired girl in the family, and she always had pride of place in the family wagon, depending on how many people were in it. The hired girl always took precedence over him, the son of the family. That's Vermont. That's Vermont democracy. The notion that, the problem with that, of course, is, beguiling as it is, attractive as it is, a town meeting is not a national government. Coolidge, however, maintained a healthy sense of proportion about himself and his seemingly exalted status in the White House. You know, famously, John Adams' prayer is carved in the fireplace of the state dining room. I've often thought that these words of Calvin Coolidge should be inscribed over the door. It is a great advantage to a president, said Coolidge, and a major source of safety to the country for him to know that he is not a great man. Not surprisingly, press criticism rolled off his back. An agitated Herbert Hoover once protested an unfriendly column in the American Mercury. "You mean that one in the magazine with the green cover?" said Coolidge. "I started to read it, but it was against me, so I didn't finish it." Think how different history might have been in the 20th century if other presidents simply didn't finish it.